Adam Taxin talking with Daniel Greenfield about his Saturday, August 18th, 2012 column called The World of Tomorrow. Daniel, welcome. And is it fair to take away as the main theme of your column that there is no future anymore, as a culture, or as a cultural reference point, that everything is retro, that there is no... How am I putting this? I'm not even putting it right. Admittedly, I am tired. That the whole era of future thinking has come to a sort of stale conclusion. Is that fair?
Somewhat. The whole idea of futurism is really dependent on forward progress. You have to keep moving forward for futurism to make any kind of sense. And we're really not moving forward where we used to, and that's disguised heavily because our internet information technology infrastructures have given us some pretty neat gadgets, but culturally, certainly we are not moving forward in the least. We're actually moving backward. Politically, we're moving backward. We're moving backward even in terms of basic competence, which really defines the ability of a culture to get things done.
And what do you think the cause of that, above all else, is? Just that we hit a point where mankind can't progress any future, or something else?
Well, we can certainly progress. I don't know that there's any kind of hard limit to being able to progress, but the problems are cultural. We've gone to a place where we're a culture that isn't really defined by anything except the idea that if we try hard enough, that if we conform everybody and move into this kind of system, we'll build some sort of utopia, and that's not really the way you make progress. That's the way you build a giant prison, and that's really what we've built. We have this wonderful, tremendous socialist progressive prison, a prison for all nations, also known as the United Nations, but we don't actually have any forward progress to go with it. The Soviet Union, for example, is always about forward progress. It just wasn't actually making any progress. Most of its progress, to the extent that it had any, was being borrowed from the United States and Western countries. Once you embrace this kind of idea of a perfect utopia that you have to control everybody to properly build, and that it requires total conformity, then you stop really making any kind of meaningful progress.
Understood. Now, you late in the column discuss Islam as sort of an antidote to the stale impression of the culture and the future. Essentially, it's because Islam has a real sense of purpose, right?
It has a sense of purpose, and it also has an idea of a specific endpoint. For the left, really, what is the endpoint exactly at this point? Okay, so we will elect Obama for another 4 years, we'll sign some more treaties, we'll push everything further and further into this kind of tightly compressed global sphere controlled by NGOs and activists and politicians, that there's no really defining moment. This is one of the reasons that they've embraced global warming, because it gives them that sense of Armageddon. There's a timeline here. There's 2012, end of the world. The ice caps are going to melt in 5-10 years, and then we're all going to be done unless we immediately start buying fair trade coffee and recycling plastic bags and so on and so forth. It provides a sense of Armageddon. It also provides this kind of sense of utopia, and since obviously it also has a religious component, you have this idea that people can transcend the flaws, their human flaws, and somehow unite in this kind of super system.
Understood. And finally, there's a line in your column which I really like. The progressive sneers at the past but cannot escape it. And that really fits in with the culture as a whole, and I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on that a bit.
Well, as I discussed in the other column this week, The End of the Alternative Media, we're really reaching a point in history where there is no real history anymore, where the whole point of history has been to escape from history. We're escaping from the 50s. We're escaping from the so-called dark era of America, when there was slavery, when women couldn't vote, when the only people who mattered wore top hats and beards. We've been escaping from this for a while now. So we've been leaving our history behind, and we're not actually creating any new history to do that. As a result, we're desperately recycling old history and calling it new history. We've got constant cultural appropriation creation because there's no actual way to go forward. We're disconnected from the past. We're rootless now.
Sad, but I guess for Jewish Americans, I mean, which you and I both are, it just, I guess, makes more observant Judaism a little more attractive because you're not giving up from the culture, you're not giving up the culture as a whole. Or am I totally out of line and exhausted here in that comment?
And quite importantly, as Orthodox Jews, you actually are connected with the history of the past. Liberal Jewish theology has really cut its ties with the past. For example, Reform Judaism at one point completely cut its ties with the idea of Israel. Only when Israel was actually created did they sort of rebuild those ties. But their goal was to cut the ties with the past. Orthodox Judaism actually is derived entirely from a connection with the past. So more traditional forms of Judaism, more traditional forms of oral religion are oriented toward history. More liberal ones are oriented toward escaping from history.
Interesting. All right, Daniel, let me just remind people that this is in no way a substitute for actually reading the columns, or if you need to, listening to the audio versions of the columns. And Daniel, thank you as always, and thank you for your brilliant work.